Welcome to Untold Trails, a storytelling podcast exploring the people, races, brands, and moments that shape trail and fell running. I'm Scott.
And I'm Fraser.
Untold Trails, stories from the trails, past, present, and what comes next.
Why are trail runners obsessed with Western States? For many runners, it's the race, the one they dream about, talk about, and spend years trying to reach. Every year, thousands enter a lottery for the chance to run 100 miles across California's Sierra Nevada mountains. Some never get in, others finish once and immediately want to come back. But why? Perhaps it's because Western States sits beyond what most people think is possible. Western States challenges runners to keep moving for an entire day and night through mountains, canyons, heat, and exhaustion. Born in the 1970s, Western States became the birthplace of modern American ultra-running culture. It was where pioneers began pushing the boundaries of endurance beyond what was thought possible, creating a race that would inspire generations of runners around the world. But Western States is also a story of community. Pacers, crews, aid stations, volunteers, and spectators, they all play their part. No one gets to Auburn at the finish line alone. So, in this episode, we'll explore the history, the legends, the course, and the culture behind one simple question. Why are trail runners so obsessed with Western States? Welcome to episode 2 of Untold Trails. So, Fraser, what's happened since we last sat down and recorded our first episode of Untold Trails on the Yorkshire Three Peaks?
Yes, including me managing to DNF it.
I weren't going to mention that. You brought it up straight away.
Well, if we're here to talk about endurance and suffering and disappointment, then, might as well get that in early. Anyway, maybe we move on quickly from that.
So what's next?
Well, funnily enough, that actually got me thinking about something else, something bigger and better. And what else do you do when you've got an injury? And but actually, this episode probably started 12 months ago or longer, because we did a lot of work and research and interviews on Western States endurance run.
Yeah, it kept appearing in trail fans, and it keeps appearing in your mind throughout the year, because no matter what it is about Western States, it's always in the news, whether it's the lottery or the entry tickets, the golden ticket races.
Yeah, and I think going back to last year, we interviewed some of the elite runners, did quite a lot of articles on it, more content than we'd done on anything else at that point. Actually, we got quite a good response, and because it shows the reach goes way beyond the UK, global kind of reach as well.
Yeah.
Really.
And we talked to obviously people who weren't just running it, but people that were pacing and crewing and assisting. And since then, we've delved into podcasts and books and articles. Besides writing articles, we've delved into other people's articles and just absorbed as much as we can about Western States and why the obsession.
Talking about obsession, listened to far too many podcasts, I think, on it.
Yeah. People don't stop talking about Western States, but there's good reason for that, isn't there?
There is a lot out there. But and on the surface of it, it's just another 100-mile race in North America.
Simple, isn't it?
It is. But the more you look into it, the more you start to realise it's about a lot more, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, if you're trying to get in, it takes you years to get in. It's more than just getting to the start line, isn't it? It's the vibe and the community and everything else that's going on about putting the race on as well.
Yeah, that obsession, and like you say, sometimes it takes years to get in it, but then people will want to go back and do better or finish it or go back for unfinished business.
Unlike us, who've not even been there, we've not even set foot on the course. So we've had to talk to people who have set foot on the course. Yeah, tell me about them.
And luckily enough, I know a guy called Chris Livesey, and he's a runner, and he went out there last year to spectate and support his friend David Brunton, who's a time-served ultramarathon man from Preston. And he went out to do the race after many years of trying to enter. So we've got a really good contrast there of two people that had never been before, how they experienced it, and what it felt like from a spectator and a participant's point of view.
And alongside that, we can draw on the conversations we've had with the athletes over the last year, and then stories from the racers and everything that we've learned from indulging ourselves in all the literature and podcasts, etc. So this isn't a race preview.
No, it's not.
It's not.
We've tried to position this as a beginner's guide to Western States.
But we are going to focus on the history, the people, the place, the suffering, the obsession, and ultimately, why is this race getting under everybody's skin?
Yes, and to understand that, we probably need to start in California,
USA,
in the Olympic Village near Lake Tahoe, and understand what it's like to be there and where is it.
I guess if you're coming into LAX after a 12-hour flight from the UK, what do you do then? Do you get another flight, or do you get a bus up to Lake Tahoe?
Yeah, well, I think the guys went into Manchester to Atlanta, then they flew up to Reno, and then from Reno, you've got a 60-minute drive down to the Olympic Village, which is near Lake Tahoe.
And just to explain, that Olympic Village was not for the Summer Olympics, it was for Winter Olympics. So what you're seeing when you arrive in the valley?
Yes, well, interestingly, both guys separately told me exactly the same experience, and that was having travelled overnight, getting into their apartment in darkness, and then that moment when they opened the curtains and they just saw the vastness of them, snow-capped mountains in June, just the awe and of the place. I suppose it's very similar to the Alps, but maybe even a little bit on steroids.
Yeah, and why does location matter in this sense?
Well, location's everything with Western States, and I guess that's what makes this such an interesting race. It starts in the Olympic Village, which is on the edge of Nevada, and at the start of the Sierra Nevada mountains. And in terms of the altitude there, I think that was another thing that was kind of very noticeable as soon as the guys stepped into town. You start in this race at...
The Olympic Valley is 1,890 metres apparently above sea level. So that's where you start.
Yeah, and just to contrast that with, UK or Europe, I think Ben Nevis is 1,300 metres approximately.
Yeah.
The Chamonix Valley is 1,000 metres. When you go up to Plan Pras, which is that first ski station, that's about 2,000 metres.
So it's higher than that.
Higher than that, and then...
And in June, there's still snow on the top bit. Once you get up to the top bit of the escarpment up there, you see runners still running in snow in the end of June. So maybe not every year, but you might have to put your snow spikes on, you attach your spikes, your shoes to get through all of that bit.
I believe that, depending on the conditions that year and how long the snow fields have stayed, or how late the snow was, you can get those snow conditions early in the race on the first climb.
It's not like running the London Marathon or anything like that, where you get on the flat on the tarmac, is it? Your first bit is all the way up into the snow. I guess that's when it starts to become real, isn't it, really? And what were the guys' sort of reactions after waking up and seeing all of that? What came next?
I think it's the walking around town and
pre-race.
This will be in the days leading up to it. But when they first walked out and you see the famous gantry, with the wooden Western States, I can visualise it.
Yeah, where they fired the shotgun off to start the race.
That's right. Yeah, and I think that at that very moment when you think this is something you've seen on TV or in pictures, and then you're there, and there's a lot going on in the village as well. I think Holker have got a big presence there as the main sponsor. There's
like an expo and trail con now the week before, and then there's other races. This whole magic is building. It's the race itself starts on the Saturday morning at 5 o'clock, but then you've got this 2 week build up with lots of different activity and people flying in from all over the world as well.
And it's still got to remember it's quite a small ski village, so it's not like Chamonix where you've got literally 10,000 people racing.
Yeah.
You've got 350 people racing and their supporters and things like that. So it's on a much smaller scale, but there seems to be a lot going on. Like I say, there's a few races. They have some sprints in the town.
There's a beer mile, isn't there? There's a beer mile before the race as well.
The beer mile, which I think you've got to do take 4 drinks on. So the guys talked about how they'd heard about this Bay Mile, so they'd gone into town, they'd taken up a seat to watch it. They weren't participating. Disappointing. They said it just turned into 10 minutes of absolute carnage. People running round, there's projectile vomiting, all this, naughtiness going on in this very historic town. But just a nice feel, some the refresher runs for the participants or anyone that wants to join in. It's like a mini trail festival.
Yeah, TrailCon, I think they call it.
TrailCon. It feels like almost like a small music festival for this week leading up to it. In fact, we've been to UTMB a number of times, and we've often spoke about that feeling in the lead up to the race weekend, haven't we?
Yeah, it's like a big takeover, isn't it? It's a
Yeah.
takeover of the whole community and the industry and the sponsors, and everyone seems to be there, don't they?
Yes, and it's exciting. It's almost like the build-up, and almost when you get to the races, it's like an anticlimax. You think, oh God, the race is finishing. Some of the best bits are finishing now as the races kick off and everyone starts to pack up. So that's a really interesting concept. The other thing was there's a lot of Q&As at the Trail Festival, and the closeness that they got to some of the athletes. So I think they went to watch one Q&A, and Scott Jurek came and sat next to Dave and noticed he had his wristband on. So when he left off, he just gave him a fist pump and said, good luck tomorrow, man, or whatever it was. That kind of closeness, again, which you might not get in Chamonix, where some of the elites and that maybe keep their heads down a little bit and stay out of the way.
Yeah.
Although we have seen Scott Jurek walking around Chamonix Centre.
I've seen him 2 or 3 times walking around Chamonix. But I think it's good to notice that closeness between people, and the fact that whether you're a runner, a pacer, a family member supporting, or someone in part of a volunteer, you're all part of one community, and there seems to be a levelling in this meeting of festival meeting prior to Western States and during the race itself. I mean, it's quite unique, isn't it, around the world?
Absolutely. It's community alongside the elite race. And there's a lot that we'll probably talk about during this as well, during the podcast. So, yeah, the other thing is, as you can see from the village floor, you can see where you're going to go on the first climb.
Yeah.
So it's like a few miles up to escarpment.
Yeah.
Like I said earlier, so I think 600-700 meters. But you can actually get a cable car up there.
Yeah.
So they went up and just to get a feel for it, and there was some ceremonies going on up there. So like a flag raising ceremony.
Yeah.
And also celebrating some of the people, past and present, that have helped with the race that are no longer around, and even in the indigenous tribes and the race history and things like that. So there's a lot going on about that history.
Yeah.
Alongside, this is just a race.
Yeah.
This week.
And obviously it's the oldest 100-mile ultramarathon in the world. Yeah.
Yes.
Along that 100-mile Western States Trail.
Yeah. Is it the oldest 100-mile race in the world?
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
Right.
From foot race. Yeah.
Yeah.
Foot race. It's seemingly grabs that title. I think continuously running since 1974, which is phenomenal.
Go on. What is an ultramarathon?
Well, my story from ultramarathons was, after running a marathon, there was that need to go a bit further. And of Western States, you were watching these movies of people running ultramarathons, and the Western States Unbreakable movie was one that stood out, made in 2010, but it was, I think I probably saw it about 2012, 2013, and you're thinking, wow, this is amazing. Is it possible? Is it possible to run more than a marathon? And essentially, an ultramarathon is anything more than a marathon. We'll talk about the history of how this Western States endurance run came into being, but this is 100-mile ultramarathon, which you might not want to do straight off the bat as your first ultramarathon, but it's 100 miles on the Western States Trail. So you're thinking of an old gold mining trail that was set up sort of 150 years ago for people to get in and pan for gold, etc., along a trail that's geographically set in the place where it is, and if we look at the map, and there'll be a map that comes up behind us here, you can see that we're starting off down from Reno, which is up and northeast of Sacramento and San Francisco in the US. If you're coming from the coast, it's inland quite a bit. Got the Sierra Nevada mountain range. So that's why this is so testing, because it's not just 100 miles on tarmac on the flat or on a going hundreds of loops around a 400-meter track. You're going through various different conditions and terrain. The 100-mile marathon or the 100-mile ultramarathon is not just a test of can you run fast, but it's how do you survive.
A lot of unknowns. Anything could happen to you out there, and the unplanned will kind of catch you out. And I suppose what makes this even more challenging is some of that terrain that you were alluding to. So I think there's about 5,500 meters of climb, but 7,000 meters of descent.
Yeah.
So it's almost downhill course, although I'm sure it doesn't feel like that when you're on it.
I'm sure you, as well as having strong quads to take the downhill, you've got to have strong muscles to get on the uphills as well. But yeah, I think people might look at it and think, well, actually, there's a lot of downhill there. It's easier than what it seems. But I don't think any 100-mile race is easy. That's not why you do it, is it?
No, and it's almost kind of got this iconic route, and it almost feels like multiple races in one because of those different conditions. That you start in the high Sierras and the mountains. You go through forests, and apparently a lot of the tracks or trails are quite narrow, and you can be in forests for quite a long time. So you're just seeing a lot of brown and green and red, dusty, muddy track. So it can be a little bit disorientating, a lot of switchbacks. You can't see the mountain ranges for long periods.
Yeah, especially if it's the first time you've been there and you've not got out there to do a recce or not lived around there, like a lot of the elites will have trained on there and will be doing it beyond the first time. I think one thing that's really sticks out to me, though, is that Western States 100 was kind of like the first one to become a race, And I think when you look at the evolution of the numbers that participated in the race going up very quickly from the first race onwards, you can see that it set a tone for ultramarathons around the world. The way that it was organised and the way that sort of people became serious about participating in a race, either as a runner or as a community member that was going to assist this epic journey. Because I think when it first started, it was about completing it. So it was about not necessarily racing the race, but it was about running the race. And I think now it's about, for the elite field, it's about racing the race. So it's about how can we get close to 14 hours or 15 hours. But for the mere mortal, it's about finishing under 30 hours, or if you can, get under 24 hours, which is still an amazing achievement. But for the elites, they're another 10 hours or 9 hours in front of that. Phenomenal to see the evolution and how this race has set the tone for that evolution of the sport since 1970s.
What does make it such an extreme challenge? We've talked about the mountains and the forest, but what other conditions and terrains are the runners going to experience out there?
Yeah, I think we'll dip into that a little bit more later on, especially when we're talking about the flora and the fauna that's out there. So it's not just the weather conditions which change from maybe the cold and the snow in the first sort of 5 miles or so, and then the heat of the canyons. And then you've got a river crossing where you've got to put a protective life jacket on, and then you're going through. You have some areas that are actually paved roads or gravel tracks. So you've got all these different conditions which are testing you. And you mentioned earlier, like it seems like there's many races in one. So because there's many aid stations along the way, you might be tempted to change your shoes, as you go along in this race, because you'll probably want to wear different stronger grip shoes in the first section than you would when it becomes a little bit more faster paced in the more rolling sections later.
And this is one of the, if not the most premier elite contested fields in the world as well. In terms of commercial, if you call this a commercial race, then you could only really argue that it's second to, or on par with UTMB, and maybe some of the iconic races such as Sierra Nevada and that kind of thing. But it really is a strong elite field.
Yeah, I think because of the difficulty to get into Western States, not as an elite, the difficulty to get in, because you've got to get a golden ticket, or you've got to have finished in the top 10 the year before, or you can perhaps luckily get in through the lottery. The actual journey to get in as an elite is you've got to be on your game in the year before Western States to qualify. So it really does take, only the best people really get in that sort of window, in that annual window of opportunity for them.
And for those that don't know a lot about the Western States 100, the hype and the build-up is just massive, isn't it? Unlike anything else. And the time of the year as well, because it is at the end of June. The season's definitely well underway, but it's almost like the Grand National. It's the Super Bowl. If it's golf, it's the Masters. This is the FA Cup final of the Trails season, and it also launches the rest of the season as well.
And it's weird because you've got that annual calendar. If you think the race is at the end of June, and then they have there's qualifying races, the golden ticket races. The first one is at UTMB. It's the CCC race. Is a golden ticket race, so there are three men and 3 women will qualify. So that's the end of August. So if you're thinking about the next year's race, your first opportunity to get in, say, next June is the end of August, and then there are more races throughout the calendar, and then in December you have the lottery. So if you're one of those fortunate people that's qualified and has got a ticket in the lottery, you'll have your eyes on the lottery in December. So then you'll know in December whether you've been picked to be one of those 369 people. That hype and that buzz is all year round. So you have the lottery in December. So then you've got more golden ticket races. Start of the year, I think in January, February, there's one in New Zealand, and then there's Chianti, which is I think it's about April. So there's constantly a Western States buzz of qualifying and getting in. So it's grabbing the headlines, no matter what time of year it is, people are talking about Western States.
And just from a logistical point of view as well, we should mention it quite clearly, is a point-to-point. So you're starting in the Olympic Village at Lake Tahoe, but you're finishing in Auburn, near Sacramento. Yeah, it's 100 miles across Sierra, the mountains and forests and the canyons, etc. But if you to drive it by car as a spectator, if you just went from start to finish by road, it's 70 miles. So if you have to go to Michigan Bluff, which is a key aid station at mile 55, which is where a lot of the pacing starts from, I believe, it's a 100-mile drive, and that's only 55 miles into the race.
And one thing that stood out to me about that when listening to the podcast is that most of this area is wilderness area, so the access for support crews or spectators is very limited. So even though there might be 28 stations, you haven't got direct access to most of them. They're not all off a main road or a highway, So driving around and supporting your runner, if you're getting up, let's say you get up at 3 a.m. for a 5 a.m. start,
yes,
and then you're going to finish sort of 24 hours later, and you've got 3 or 4 people in a support crew in a car, some of them are going to be pacers, and you're travelling around 100 odd miles. You've got to be very, very prepared as a team, not only with your logistics and what assistance you're going to give, what physical items you're going to give to your runner, but also in that, how do you avoid sort of getting tired and becoming fatigued and looking after yourself as a support crew. You've got to keep yourself hydrated, keep yourself fed, take a nap, take a power nap. So I think it's probably just as much as a challenge to be a support crew is to actually run it yourself. At least if you're running, you know where you're going.
Yeah. You go to the next aid station.
So can you imagine if I was to land there and I'm trying to get my GPS sort of working, and I'm from Lancashire, Northern England, and trying to figure out the road system in sort of Lake Tahoe area of the US. Wow, the points of failure are multiple.
Yeah, there's a lot of planning, a lot of things to think about.
Yeah,
and, in terms of the context of how special the race is at the end as well, why does finishing matter so much to people?
Well, I think once you've been on that adventure, you've been on that journey for 24 hours or 30 hours or somewhere in between, and you've gone through the highs and you've gone through the lows, not just yourself, but you appreciating how much your support team and your loved ones have also gone through to get you there in the first place, but then to get you over the line during the day. So it's not just your loved ones, but also the aid station people and all the stewards around the course and your fellow runners that you're going to meet. You're going to meet people and become friends for life because you've got this shared experience. So I think the importance of getting to that running track in Auburn where it finishes and receiving your buckle, receiving that buckle that shows that you've done it, then like we said, it takes a village to do this. So you're doing it for your team, you're doing it for everyone. So what a sense of achievement to do that, no matter what time you're finishing it.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned the buckle, and there's a book that we've both read actually, called Buckle Fever.
Yeah,
we might come back to, and I think Buckle Fever has quite a meaning to it.
Yeah,
in the context of this obsession and this race.
Yeah,
and I think you're right about the timings, the 24-hour, the 30, and the actual brutal cut-off in respect of you do 30 hours and 30 seconds. You don't actually go onto the finisher list.
I don't think you go onto the finisher list, but one special prize I think they have is for the first person who doesn't make it. So let's say you came in
right
30 hours and 30 seconds.
Yes.
That person gets an automatic entry for next year.
Yeah. Do they make them walk back to the Olympic Village?
They should do, yeah.
That would be really tough.
Yeah, so, as we said, fail to prepare to fail.
Yes. What makes it different from other races? What kind of really makes them stand out in that respect?
I think it's the whole package of the history and the history that this race has in the sport, mixed with this sort of anticipation and this place as well. Like the place is special. It's not quite your average trail race, that's going up and down a lot of mountains. It's got this unique course to it. All that mixing together with this sense of achievement at the end, and then the community support you get around it, it's still very low-key and old school. But
there is a very different finish as well, isn't there? You can take us to that finish line and the track in Auburn in terms of what pans out there over what period, because that is very different to the finish at most races. How does that feel and look differently in that respect?
But it is kind of odd, isn't it, in a way that, a wilderness-based trail race, which is in the high mountains and the canyons and got this river crossing and this place that's out in nature, finishes on the centre of a town on a running track. So you kind of hit Roby Point, which is about a couple of miles out from the finish, which is you've had a big climb up to Roby Point and then it's downhill, and then from Roby Point you kind of hit a road, and then you're on a road into the last mile or so on a road. Then you hit this running track, and I think you do probably like 3/4 of the track. I think the fact that everyone can gather there, people who've already finished, your team and your crew will get there that have been supporting you along your way, the family. So everyone comes out to support, especially the last runners. So they have this thing called Golden Hour, which is 29 hours to 30 finish.
Trying to make that beat that 30-hour cut-off.
Yeah, so anyone who's finishing Golden Hour, I think because that happens in the point in the day where it's those who finish sort of say, 10, 15 hours early have had time to have a sleep and recuperate. So they are all coming out to finish and watch you
celebration,
finish.
I guess.
Celebration. So it's the whole community.
What time
together.
So it kicks off at 5 a.m. So you're 30 hours later. So we're talking 9 a.m.
Yeah, it's kind of just
midday, would it be actually?
Do the quick math, yeah. So it's sunny, it's warm. Most people have had some overnight sleep and rest.
Barbecues will be going.
Yeah.
Celebrations can kick off. People, no doubt, just passed out, absolutely exhausted.
Like I say, it's Sunday morning, isn't it? And you've been at it for some people have been at it for sort of a week or two. They've been out there and everything.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier about the people supporting and helping out.
Yeah.
They'll have been at that finish line for some of them 15, 20 hours, no doubt. From setting up and staying all the way through. Yeah. So it's pretty
when you listen to the podcast of the official race podcast where aid station captains are telling you about how much effort's gone into setting up the aid station, they get there 2 or 3 days before and they set it up, they test all the equipment and they all try and get back to because the aid stations will close once the final runs have come through. If you're at, say, Forest Hill, or if you're at sort of Robinson Flat a bit earlier on in the race, you were finished, you were tidied up, and you'll all try and get to Auburn to see that Golden Hour finish. So everyone's there, and it's one big celebration of everyone being the best person they can be over that course.
That is classed as the community and the support and things like that. So touching on that, how does it all happen? You've got who does what, you've got the volunteers, the organisation and the trails, the aid station and things like that. Just kind of touching on that aspect.
Yeah, I think in a nutshell, when we say community, and we've been using it quite loosely, but when you look at what it actually is, it's a Western States Endurance Run is an independent non-profit organisation. It's under some US law. So it has a governing body, a board of directors, and it has executive officers. So at its core, it's a community organisation. And there are, I think there are 14 members on the governing body. The operation side of it is responsible for promoting ultra running. So these are the three core aspects: promoting ultra running, maintaining trail stewardship, so maintaining the Western States course as well as they can over the year, which might involve a lot of clearing up after the winter and making sure points of the race are passable, etc. Conducting medical research into the race, because people go through a lot of biological and I'm sure psychological ups and downs as they go through that journey. And they also facilitate the world-class race of what it is. So they're the three pillars of the Western States Trail Organisation or race organisation. So, and then you have the race management, and then you have all these aid station captains. So an aid station, let's say there's sort of 15, 20 aid stations along the course. There'll be a captain for each aid station, and many of those come from running clubs. So a running club might say, right, we're taking over this, and they've done it historically for years now. So the one that I was listening to for Forest Hill, and Forest Hill's probably the biggest aid station. It's on quite a main road, so it's easy access. Loads of people go there, and there's hundreds of people turn up there. So it's the most difficult one to manage. They pride themselves in having, probably they always say we're the best aid station, but it's an army of volunteers that go in there. But the running clubs that do it, they have a kind of pecking order. So if you volunteer, not just at this race, but other races preparing for this race, if you volunteer for that, the aid station captain can then select one of the aid station crew to get a free ticket into the race. So it's one way to get into the race as well. So I think that encapsulates how much the race organisation and community all fits together. So you're like, right, okay, I think the Forest Hill aid station, they all come from Reno. So they travelled from Reno to set it all up. So, and I think what's interesting about this, we see this replicated in other races around the world. I think the Laken 100 in the UK, and I've been out to Tarawera race, which is a qualifying race in New Zealand, and you see how these aid stations are managed, and it's such a celebration. But I think one thing that they really put an emphasis on is, let's get that runner through safely and with as little anxiety as possible, but they always make sure they get people on the way, because people might be doubting themselves at one stage. But get them out the door and get them moving on along the way with whatever they need.
Yeah, I think that comes across really strongly in some of the content in the podcast, is that it's all about getting people to finish. Yeah, and even speaking today about him going through the aid station, to have timings showing how far they are behind X cutoff, and so people are they want you to be safe, they want to make sure you're okay, but they're trying to lift people's spirits and get, it's all about getting people to finish.
A lot of this ultra running thing is in the head, and once you start going down that sort of dark headspace, and you need that positive affirmation to someone to get you on the way. It's happened to me in races where I've started walking and I've been with someone else who's then given me positive energy, and next thing you know, you're like, wow, you're running the pace you should be running again. So you need that positive energy coming through, and I think the whole organisation lives and breathes that ethos, whether you're an aid station captain or a crew, etc.
And this started from a small team of 3 or 4 back in 1978, and it's grown ever since. And families took these aid stations on in the early days, and I think that through decades you've had people connected through families with manning certain aid stations and the growth of that.
One that stood out to me was the Scott family, and I think they've been involved for about 40 years now in manning an aid station and being volunteering at the race. So it's different generations of the family, and a lot of these people that volunteer have also run the race, so they know what it is. They know that feeling, they know what it takes. So a lot of these aid station captains and the aid station volunteers, they've run the race maybe multiple times.
Veterans of the race, or if you're not, then you're going to be thinking, I need to do this. Imagine being at those stations. I've had so many people that have been inspired to think, I'm gonna give this a go. Yeah,
and I think it's a key part of the organisation committee as well. And if they get a new member of staff on, that's going to be a key role to make sure that they get out and run the race. They have that opportunity to get that feeling, to understand what it's about.
So let's just take a step back. Where did all this begin?
remember before when I said this was an old mining route? So the Western States Trail, 100 miles, an old mining route. But I think during the earliest part of the last century, so up to the Second World War and after it, most of these routes weren't being used anymore. So they were overgrown and they were redundant, they were dormant. And along came this guy, Wendell Roby. And if you notice so far, Roby Point is the final aid station that was named after him. At 160 kilometres, so it's 1 mile before the finish, almost the finish. So Wendell Roby came along and he started this clearing the trail, and he was really into horse riding as well, which a lot of people were still horse riders around there. And he started this race called the Western States Endurance Ride, which became known as the Tevis Cup. I think that's the prize, the cup that they gave. So that started in 1955. So I think this was a period where people coming out of the Second World War, people were starting to get a bit more leisure time and starting to do outdoor activities and open up the wilderness area, because before that, most people didn't venture out there. So he had this idea to clear the trail and get this race, this horse race or horse ride across this 100-mile route, which is iconic now. And he started this, and then we moved forward to 1970s, and there was this guy called Gordy Ainsley, and you'll probably see a picture come up of Gordy and his beard and his bare chest. He looks like a rugged mountain guy from Western States, quintessential, And Gordy Ainsley was riding the Tevis Cup and wasn't always doing all right, and they had aid stations and vets to look after the horses along the way. And I think it was in the 70s, Gordy had a horse, and do you know what his horse was called?
I don't.
His horse was called Rebel, and his horse went lame. Gordy sort of had to sort of walk it in, but then the year after he said, right, I'm going to run, I'm going to do it on foot. So people going, you're having a giraffe there. Like, no way you're going to do that on foot. Anyway, Gordy set off, and fortunately, apparently, two of his friends who were riding as well, they came a cropper and couldn't continue. And Gordy was struggling at some point, not sure where it was, and they gave him assistance and supported him, and they gave him drinks and gave him all this sort of stuff. So it was kind of like the first instance of support of a crew as such. This was during 1974.
And there wasn't, certainly wasn't a 100-mile race.
No.
It wasn't familiar kind of thing then.
No, this was still the Tevis Cup. So they agreed for Gordy to take part in the Tevis Cup on foot. And then after he did it and he achieved it, they were like, right, okay, let's start really thinking about doing this. So then the next year, a few more people joined in, and then the next year, a few more. So it started gathering some pace. Then in 1977, there were 12 starters and 4 finishers. So it wasn't much.
And this, at this point, they're running with the horses still on the same race?
They were running exactly in the same race.
Okay.
So that was 1974. Then 1978, the run broke away from the race.
Okay, so it kind of evolved over those few years, because I think that the history of the aid stations, it kind of comes from, they had to have aid stations back then, because at certain points they'd rest the horses for an hour. That was you had to do that. That was the medical kind of setup they'd put in place. I mean,
their sort of wisdom and knowledge and sort of humanitarian attitude towards the horses was amazing at that time, So there was vets along the course, etc., etc. But if I can just go back to Gordy Ainsley, wasn't the first person to do it on foot.
Okay.
So in 1972, and it also links back to the war a little bit. In 1972, the US had been fighting in Vietnam and the Korean War, and the infantry brigades were not. The wars were a bit more about bombing and things. The infantry wasn't quite the same as strong or prominent as it was probably in the Second World War. It was a big infantry war. So I think it was the 1st Infantry Division, and there was a general there that thought, right, we need to have a new doctrine for boosting the infantry division. And he's heard about this trail and thought, right, I'm going to get some of my guys to walk this hike, this route, And I think the doctrine was really interesting, because it's a bit similar to what a crew would be doing now. And he'd actually said the new doctrine after Vietnam was to focus on individuals acting together as a resolute, resilient, and resourceful fighting machine. And in some ways, if you were to run the race, You need that crew, and you need that crew to be resilient and resourceful and fight you through to the end. So this set the tone. And then these guys in the infantry division, led by, well, there's actually a story written by Davy Crockett and Phil Worley on this story that shows this 4 or 5 guys from the infantry division that I think the first one completed in 45 hours. So it was a hike, and they had the military boots on, and they had all this stuff.
So on this course? On this
course, so
okay.
this predated Gordy Ainsley and doing it on foot on the race. But Gordy was running it. I think he was actually a pretty good runner. So he was, he'd run marathons. He was an endurance guy.
Yes.
So he ended up going, man, I bet I can run that, and he did. So we go back then to 1978. The running race changed period. I think the horse race was a different part of the year, so they started doing the race.
And this is when they built the small team of 3 or 4.
Yeah.
And this is where they said, let's grow this into the race that it's become today.
I think there's this gang of 4, and there was this 2 women known as Shannon and Moore, that were instrumental in marketing the race. So much so that, as I said earlier, I think in 1977 there was only 12 starters, but in 1979 the race had kind of gone global. There was 143 starters, so over the space of a couple of years they've gone from 12 starters to 143, and there were 96 finishers in 1979. So those 2 were a marketing machine. I think they got adverts in, they had friends connected in Manhattan, and they were putting it out in magazines.
And these guys were connected, very deeply connected to trail and the outdoors and the horse racing as well.
Yeah,
so
I think
it's endurance kind of based area. In fact, they try to name Auburn as the endurance capital of the world, and you can kind of see why.
And I think you were seeing in the cities, you were seeing the marathon booming and becoming popular, but all of a sudden Western States happened that year, and then there was this boom. And I think within a certain amount of period, so within Carl Morris in his book talks about how it exploded, but I think there was only 14 starters, and as it continued to grow, he was saying it doubled every year until a lottery system came in 1980, and then the stats he was saying are breathtaking, because in 1972 there were only 6 ultra distance events in the United States.
In
1972 there were only 6 ultra distance, and then it climbed to a modest 23 events in 1978, and then by 1982 there were 209 ultra distance endurance events, running events in the US. So you just see over that 5 years it boomed, and Western States was the pioneer of all that. So everyone started seeing the adverts in Ultra Running magazine, and people were subscribing to the magazine, and it was
there were stories of the guys from Runners World getting involved.
Yeah.
Was it Runners World or the Ultra?
I think it was the Ultra Running magazine. Yeah,
of course it was.
Yeah.
Yes.
And at that point, that was the internet. That was the way that you would connect. You would subscribe to that magazine, and you would dip into that, and you would read it, and that's where you got, I fancy a go at that, So this was the pioneering race for that boom. And Carl Morris's book sort of highlights this 900% rise in four years of ultra running. So this race set the whole thing going.
There was huge growth, but why is there only 369 runners now then?
So that's an interesting final story on the history as well, because the Wilderness Act came in around that time. I think it came in 1984, and the Wilderness Act made that a certain, I think it's a 4 or 5 mile section in the High Sierra, fell under the Wilderness Act. So it meant it was out of bounds. So the race organisers then had to lobby the senator for the area to champion this and take it through so they could get exception. So there's an extensive lobbying period. Eventually they won, and they said, right, you can have your race go through that wilderness area, but there's got to be a limit to how many people can do it, because it's a wilderness area, it needs protecting.
Which is a big thing in the US generally.
Generally, yeah. So it started from the Wilderness Act in 1984. So I think the senator must have said, well, how many people ran last year? It's 369. So that's why the 369 came in, and it's been limited there ever since. I think they do it over an average over so many years. So one year it might only be 365, so they can have a couple more the next year. So I think this year it's up to 370.
Okay.
There you go. So, Fraser, let's go back to the start of the race. We're going up the escarpment, and this is quite a mythical part of the race. Tell me about that.
Yeah, this sounds really kind of exciting. So you can picture it's 3 o'clock in the morning when people are going to be rolling out of bed. You've got spectators, you've got the participants. All kicks off in town. 5 a.m. is the start, but there's apparently thousands of people there for that. In fact, Dave, who's running it, told a great story of there's only a few hundred runners, but there was what felt like thousands of spectators, and he had to get to the start line. He was having to push through people, and all of a sudden the shotgun goes off, the famous shotgun, and he's like, "Oh God, here we go!" And he's off trying to push through the actual spectators.
And I guess the start of most races, you start faster than you should do. But is that what happened? Or
well, I'm not sure, but you're straight into apparently you can see very clearly the high point at 3 or 4 miles, 700 meters, so you can see how steep it's going to be. As a spectator, there's a viewing point called the Escarpment, which is quite a famous place on the course, and a lot of spectators go up to that. So Chris had got up early, and they actually have a spectators guided tour that goes up the mountain to this point.
Yeah.
Maybe the ski lift mustn't be running at
the
that
tram?
point.
It's a tram, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. I think the tram's been running from last year. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
Proper from the tram to get.
So yeah, well maybe the driver doesn't start until 6 a.m. I don't know. But
or you hike up, don't you?
Yeah, so the hike up. Chris had got there early, and he hiked up. Met a guy, an American guy who'd who'd run a 200-mile race around Lake Tahoe. So Chris was probably telling him about his athletics career and so on and so forth. So you're meeting people everywhere you go. You're meeting people that are very passionate about the sport.
Yeah, and
they get up there about 4:30 a.m. So it's very cold up there at this point in time.
Yeah.
The snow underfoot still. And Chris said, looking back, you could see hundreds of people, head torches, snaking up the mountain. The spectators still.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden went from this very, very quiet location to very quickly absolutely packed with people. There was people dressed as yetis. There's a lot of noise. There's bells, and the small narrow tracks very quickly became 3 or 4 deep. So Chris had to kind of go down into a different location, and then all of a sudden you hear the shotgun from the mountain, and everyone just starts going crazy, and the runners start hitting it about 5 a.m. as the sun starts to rise in the background, and you can hear them coming, the crowd just gets louder and louder.
Yeah.
I said it's just one of those moments where the hairs stand up on the back of your neck.
Yeah.
And then obviously you get the front runners coming through, and then the mid pack start coming through. Dave's kind of from Dave's point of view as a runner coming through, he said it was just incredible. He run such a high and run through, and he said I actually felt like a rock star going through that point. So this is only 3 or 4 miles into the course. So what a start going up there, and at this point you're at the highest part of the course already.
I was going to say, how was his breathing on the altitude? Because you are over 2,000 meters by that stage, aren't you?
Well over, yeah. It must be tough when you've done the climbing as well, and the cold.
And did Chris do any altitude training, or did he? Dave, did he do any altitude training, or was he prepped for that?
I don't think he had the opportunity, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thought of being there at that time, and you've done 3 or 4 miles, and you've hit the highest point in the course. You know that the air conditions are going to get better from that point in, and you're getting cheered on like you're a celebrity. There must be a little bit of a false sense of security starts creeping in as to, oh, this isn't too bad, and I've done the worst. But then off you go into the wilderness alone with just the other runners, and at some point after that, there must be a kind of realization of, wow, I've got 95 miles left to do, and we're just getting started.
And I guess it starts spreading out a little bit from there on in, because I guess the pack's quite tight in the first 5 miles, because everyone's climbing together. And
it's a very narrow path, so not a lot of overtaking opportunities and things like that. So I guess people settle into a pace, and off they go and move on to the next location as the heat starts picking up.
And I heard that building into this 2026 race, there's not much snow up there, but there was snow up there last year. So was it easy to find orientate the way through the path?
Yeah, I don't think there was snow, but I don't think it was a bad year in that sense.
Yeah.
It wasn't something that was difficult to contend with. But what a start, the Tour de France of trail running, I think, and what a way to start the race off.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's the feeling for people, you know, you've explained that feeling quite well for both how Chris and Dave felt as well. And it just makes me feel I need to book a ticket.
It does. So it's got a mythical start and it's also got a mythical finish. So we talked earlier about the golden hour.
Yeah, I mean, everyone wants to finish under 30 hours or 24 hours, but those last few miles are sort of, it's that real need to get the buckle. And we talked earlier about buckle fever and why people are so desperate to finish, but those last few miles are not always that easy, are they?
Yeah, no, it's a real challenge to get under the 30. There is this obsession with gaining a finishing buckle. Just tell us a little bit about the buckles and how you get one.
I think there are two sorts of buckles. There might be a few more sorts of buckles, but I think there's an under 24-hour buckle because that was the initial challenge of the endurance ride and the endurance run was to finish under 24 hours. And now there's the final cutoff is 30 hours, so you get a buckle for under 30 hours. I think they also give out buckles for someone who's done, say, 1,000 miles, so they've done it 10 times. So special engravement, I guess, on the buckle. So, and people will savour and wear their buckles with pride over the years, and sort of, I think it's that kind of nod of respect that if you've got a buckle that you've been through the same as what the other person has. So buckle fever, but it's not just the people running golden hour and the sort of middle back of the pack that's striving for buckles. It's also, you know, the people at the front of the pack, isn't it?
Yeah, I actually, when I did the race in Lake Placid last year, the Spartan race, I ended up talking to Chris Brown, the organizer, afterwards.
Yeah.
And he was wearing his buckle with pride. We got talking about the Western States because we'd done some work on it and things like that. And
Chris Brown's finished quite high up as well, didn't he? I think in the sort of before lockdown, before COVID period.
He got top 10 in his first attempt. So he had that on. I got a picture with him. He's wearing it with pride.
Under 24 hours, I guess.
And I didn't really know much about the buckles until that point. So, But as we've done more research, there's a lot more to them, isn't there?
Yeah, sure. And I think one story that stands out is at the front of the pack. What year was it when Brian Morrison was running?
So 2006.
Right. Yeah.
So
this story. Yeah.
Well, we've read the book Buckle Fever by Shannon Wheel.
Yeah.
And I never took much notice of the title throughout the book. And it was like last night when I was reading the final chapter. Yeah. They told a story which I'd heard about, which is quite a very famous story about a guy called Brian Morrison in 2006. And he had come to the race as a first timer, very highly regarded. Yeah. Scott Jurek was rooting for him, and Scott Jurek, the 7-time winner of the Western States, actually agreed to pace him.
Is that the final section he agreed to pace him?
I'm not sure. I think he'd probably gone out from Michigan Bluff and paced him from there. And by the time they got to Nohan's Bridge, which is only a few miles from the end, apparently Jurek was absolutely cooked. Disregarded his own well-being and nutrition.
Yeah, I think that day, wasn't it?
Well, probably always all day there, yeah. And anyway, they came in. Jurek was cooked. They actually kind of shouted out for a pacer to take him the last 3 miles. There's a guy there called Jason Davis who was there as a spectator, previous finisher of the Western States. Someone pushed him forward and said, "You do it." So all of a sudden, unplanned, undressed for it, he says, "I'm going to take you for the next 3 miles and we're going to win the Western States."
And it's quite unknown for first timer to win the race, yeah?
I imagine so, yeah, definitely. Yeah. It's the kind of course you need to know. Anyway, they go out of Nohan's Bridge. I think there's a bit of a climb. They pushed up there and they came into Auburn. I think Jason started noticing that Brian was not moving very well. Things didn't feel right. And it turns out that the guy was basically falling apart with a couple of miles to go. He had a couple of really bad falls that he didn't remember about until after the race, apparently. At this point, other people were becoming aware. I think Jurek had recovered and kind of caught up with him as they were coming into Auburn. People were becoming unaware that there was a serious problem. second place guy was only 10 minutes behind, something
Wow,
like this, 5-10 minutes. So the pressure was on. Apparently Brian Morrison was hallucinating, thinking he could see him behind. And I think they got him towards the track. Jason actually said to Jurek, please take back over. Jason stays around. The guy kind of collapses, I believe. And to the point where they can no longer leave him untouched because, you know, they're concerned for his medical health and this kind of thing. So they assist him, they get him across the line, and hence he gets disqualified. The guy, I think, came in second 5 minutes later, so he probably could have crawled around and got across, but it didn't sound like he had the capabilities to do that. There's a story then beyond that, and it kind of relates to the obsession of going back. Brian Morrison came back and completed Western States several years later, once or twice. But there was a story about Jason. I think it sounded like he took this really badly. That's a lot of guilt, as if he maybe thought he'd been a cause for this. And for a 10 or 15 year period, he had this hanging over his head and certainly fell out of the Western States and didn't want to be around it because he felt this enormous weight around his shoulders.
And had he not seen Brian? Have they not had any contact?
No, I mean, they didn't know each other.
Right.
So the story goes something like he was at the race 10 to 15 years later.
Yeah.
He kind of was coming to terms with it, he'd spoken to people, and it turns out Brian had been trying to find this guy and get hold of him, and someone brought it up with him. Anyway, they arranged to meet. He went and met him, and it was a very emotional moment when everything seemed to be let go. Then Jason almost kind of fell back in love with the race and stated his wishes to return and do it again. I'm not sure if he actually. I did try and find if he's done it since, but I couldn't find for sure that he'd completed it.
So comments below if you know Jason's
What
story
happened to
beyond
Jason
that. Jason Davies
Yeah.
completing the race, hopefully. What a great story as well. I think it's similar to looking at the elite as well. You know, 2006 there was no photos, there was no video footage of that, or maybe there is some out there. It'd be great to see it, but there's not the media hype as what there is now. So I think those are word of mouth stories that the books and things really bring this out, which is amazing. But the other thing with the elites is the Cougars. Brian, in getting DNF for being assisted, lost the Cougar.
For the audience, I think we should say what a Cougar is.
My first encounter with a Cougar, not a real life Cougar, but the winning trophy for the winner of Western States, both male and female get this massive Cougar trophy. There's a Cougar on a plateau. Fortunately for me, I've stroked a couple of the Cougars, and well, it wasn't dodgy. I went on an ultra running camp, and the horse was Rob Craw, and Rob Craw won Western States twice, and in his living room he's got 2 Cougars. So we were at the end of this camp for a few days in Flagstaff in Arizona, not far, and a lot of people train for Western States in and around Flagstaff. And apparently in Flagstaff there's so many Cougars because a lot of people that train and live in Flagstaff have won Western States. But I was introduced to these Cougars and through Rob, and Rob was telling us stories about him winning Western States, and so I think that started my sort of obsession as well. It piqued my obsession with the race, you know, and the elite side of the race. And I think it's really interesting that the elite side of the race has changed so much from the Cougars or let's say even Brian Morrison's time, where had to be assisted and was failing. But I don't think it's the only story of, you know, someone who's high profile and elite. I think there's also in the Ultramarathon Man book, Dean Canassis was also around that same point where he had a massive stumbling. There's a chapter in his book where he had a stumbling with just a few miles to go, where he's going up to Roby Point, or around Roby Point. It's quite rocky and trail, and he was fading and he was struggling with his sleep deprivation, and he sort of came a cropper, but finally came to, and I think he met his dad at the top of Roby Point, and he gave him a straightener, and Dean went in and finished as well. I think that fascination with trying to, at the elite end of trying to finish the race back in those days, is a bit different from these days, where these guys are now pushing to get below 14 hours to finish it, which is phenomenal. It's 10 hours faster than the 24-hour buckle. To win a Cougar now, you've got to be under 14 and a half hours. You know, and maybe even this year, maybe under 14 hours. Let's see what happens.
What does the Cougar represent?
Well, it's a life-changing moment in the sport for anyone who wins the Cougar, because, as we discussed earlier, you don't always win it the first time that you compete as an elite in a race, but it's usually the second or third time if you're up at that lead stage. But if you win that Cougar, especially in the modern era, you are opening yourself up to becoming a professional trail runner. I think the winner last year wasn't a professional when he won it, but he's now since quit his job and he's given a big contract with sponsors and all the hype that comes with it. So I think the Cougar itself, like the buckle represents someone who finishes the race, the Cougar represents the actual elite runners pushing the boundaries, moving forward, and actually having that life-changing moment where it's going to shoot you into the stratosphere of elite running, elite ultra running.
I suppose you win the Western States, you're at the absolute top pinnacle of this sport.
And there's numerous examples. The British example of Tom Evans, I think it was his second or third time when he eventually won Western States. And you never win it first time. You understand the course and the struggle, and you become obsessed.
That relates quite well to UTMB as well. It would be very unusual for someone to walk in and nail that course. It takes a lot of the Americans coming over. It took them years and years. And Jim Walmsley, that's a great example. But he kept on going, and he got it in the end, didn't he?
And Jim took a wrong turn at some point in Western States, and
it was his third time, wasn't it? On the course when he actually won it.
And he's become one of the legends. And I think the Cougar and the buckle both represent massive things. The buckle more for that middle of the pack who's going to sort of run the race, and then the Cougar for someone who actually races the race.
Yes, the obsession doesn't stop there. You've got the aid stations, the crewers, the pacers, the spectators. Why do so many people take part or turn up when they're not even racing? What's it all about?
The level of participation in the race, if we're talking about 1,500 volunteers and probably more, and then that's the volunteers under the organisation which we discussed earlier, and then you've got the pacers and the crews and the family, and then just random spectators or past participants all turning up, and they all want to be a part of it. I think it's this cultural thing of belonging to something that's bigger than them, and actually seeing people push themselves. So even if this year you decided you weren't going to participate or try to get into Western States, you want to be, if you live in that area, you want to go along and support your friends. You might want to be a pacer, you might want to be a crew member, and that sort of obsession never leaves people. It's sort of like, it's Western States week, I've got to be there, especially if you're in North American Trail, and I've got to be there, I've got to be part of the whole sort of festival that's going on there. And I think that's quite unique in the sport, that so many people turn up because they feel that belonging.
I think you get a lot, don't you, from seeing other people achieve their goals. And it makes people feel good, and just being part of that whole activity.
I think it's that thing that in ultra running you live your life in 24 hours. If you're going through a long 100-mile race like this, you go through every sort of emotion, but also as a participant, as a non-participant, a non-runner, you also go through these emotions, because you don't quite know. There is that uncertainty to who's going to win or how your runner's going to go on. Whether you look at the front of the back, it's an uncertainty. No one knows what's going to happen on that day. There's someone at the front end is going to buckle and not sort of get a buckle, and then others are going to shine where we didn't expect them to shine. The uncertainty is something that grips people in.
So the obsession doesn't stop there. Then there's the spectators globally that want to follow this race and watch you through the weekend. So what does that look like?
Well, today's media landscape for Western States is completely different from, maybe when we started watching it sort of 10 years ago, and it's blowing up and changing year on year. Now there's a massive live stream which you can watch, and there's video footage with riders and runners, with camera riders, camera runners, following the elite athletes and covering the aid stations. So you can actually see what's going on. Like if Ryan Morrison had been, that had been the situation in 2025, we would have seen him collapse. We would have seen all that thing live, and the sort of uncertainty that I mentioned earlier would have been zoomed at you sort of across the Atlantic to Great Britain. We could see all that uncertainty taking place and unfolding in who's going to win, etc. But going back a step, we had this film called Unbreakable, which was made and covered in 2010, which was a massive hook for people seeing this race. And there were it followed 3 or 4 of the top runners, including Kilian Jornet and Anton Kapitsa, as they battled across. I think there were 3 or 4 runners that had all run 100-mile races and they were unbeaten when they took each other on. So it covers that race. People watched that documentary and thought, oh my God, this is amazing, And it was the first time the race had been exposed to a massive audience. And even then there was no live stream. So that continued into a dot watching phase where you'd watch the dot from the GPS tracker and how people are going, and there'd be sort of text message sort of commentary on Twitter or something in the early sort of 2012, 2013. So you could watch it that way. So the media landscape's evolved massively. And now we've got these live stream with commentators, with people who've got good knowledge of the course facts. And so we get a really informed view of what's going on now. So that drives the hype even more.
But having said that, there is still a lot of gaps in that coverage, isn't there? Because it's really frustrating because especially in the early parts of the race, I guess, when they're in the mountain ranges and in the wilderness where you can't, they don't have any camera footage.
It's not easy to get your head around it, because you think of, this is going on in California as we're recording this now. The World Cup's about to start. I think the first game in the US is in Los Angeles, not far away from where this race takes place. And for a 90-minute football game, they have the broadcasting down to a T. We know when we're going to get adverts, we know when we're going to get pundits speaking. But for a 24-hour or a 30-hour coverage, it's difficult to piece together. And they're finally trying to do that.
Does it make it more exciting when you're trying to watch and actually there's parts of it you don't know what's going on? There's a lot of guessing. There's a lot of false reports come through, and then the first sign you get is a dodgy stream at an aid station, or the dots, the GPS.
As you're depicting, the live stream aren't perfect yet, but especially on YouTube now where you have the chat. So some people in the chat might be actually out on the course, so they might be ahead of the live stream relay for the people that are commentating. So you get all this information. It might not be in sync with what you're seeing on the screen. So in some ways, it's still a bit of a guessing game. And I think once you're inside that media obsession with watching the race, there's still that uncertainty. Has that person really dropped out, or is the GPS tracker not working, or have they just not got a camera runner with that person? So I think there's still a long way to go to make it a perfect stream. But there's also the question, do you want it to be perfect? I think it's part of that. Watching from afar, you're going to have to sleep yourself at some point, And I haven't stayed up all 24 hours to watch. I'll probably go to bed and wake up and think, okay, well,
it's only 15 hours. You can manage that, Scott. So, is Western States the most consumed race in trail running, would you say?
It's up there with UTMB. I think those are the 2 big ones, aren't they, generally? I think in the US, definitely Western States is the one that's up there. Figures are starting to come out for Cocodona 200, and people on that live stream is getting big numbers. But I think the whole sport is just growing and growing. So the number of people live streaming and getting involved in the chat is just growing and growing. I'm sure the people can drop in the chat the real figures and numbers year on year as it is actually growing. There's a long way to go, but I think it just builds the excitement. I think even only this week, a Chinese media company has got the rights to live stream in China. So that just shows, we had some, if you look at the top sort of 20 finishes from last year, there's about 6 or 7 different nationalities in that top 20 sort of. So the amount of non-Americans turning up there now and taking those golden tickets and participating also from the back end of the pack as well, people traveling from all over, and that hype of trail running around the world is just growing and growing. The industry figures are also showing that in sales of trail running shoes and gear.
And I think we're recording this just over a couple of weeks before the start. I think over the next week you'll really start to see things ramp up, won't you?
Yeah, for sure. It's already started ramping up with the things that I'm watching. People are making predictions, and people are sort of telling who's dropped out of the race because they've got injuries, etc. So the hype is already building, and you can play free trail fantasy on who you think is going to be in the top 10, etc. So the hype is building.
Excited.
Yeah. So you're feeling all that hype?
I am.
How do you go about getting in?
There's 369 places, isn't there, as we've alluded to. I think maybe best to start with how Dave got his entry and his journey. So his journey started back in 2012. That's when he did his first ultra 50 miler. Started reading the books, ultramarathon man, and so on. And you start hearing things about Western States, don't you? And that was always the big one, the one that stood out, the one that you're reading the most about. And
the bucket list race.
Yeah, so that I think that became on his horizon. His journey started in 2012. He did the race last year, and he did more and more ultras, and ultimately decided he was going to try and participate. And you have to get a qualifying race, and then you have to go into this lottery.
What were the qualifying races?
I'll come on to that in a moment, because I've been looking at that.
Oh yes, oh, you're getting ahead of us now. Ooh, I like it.
But I think David qualified. If you do a qualifying race, you get one ticket, and every year, assuming you don't get in, you have to do another qualifying race to retain the tickets you've built up, and they build up over time. I think they double. You might go 1, 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 8.
So it's not like the London Marathon. If you don't get an entry this year, your entry gets transferred to next year. It's not like that. You've got to do another qualifying race.
Absolutely,
wow.
Yeah. Which, given the extremities of the race, is probably very appropriate.
And the most qualifying races like 100 miles as well, or 100k, 100 miles?
Yes, so you'll have a mixture.
Wow. So it's a fair effort to do a qualifying race in itself every year.
Yeah, it's pretty serious, but a lot of them won't be as hard as Western States as well, for something else to consider.
Yeah.
But they have a lottery draw, and I think that's put out live on YouTube or whatever it is.
I think it's the obsessions even come to the lottery draw. I think people have watch parties, or they even buy a plane ticket to go to Auburn or wherever it's held, and they go and actually attend it because they think they've got a chance. Yes. So there's 10,000 people, isn't it? I think who might have a ticket.
Yeah, and I think last year Dave didn't even watch it. So the first he knew about it was he got an email.
So he thought he had no chance. I won't watch it.
Yeah, probably didn't think he was going to get in. And I asked him how he felt about getting that email, and I think it was a bit of a realization of, right, wow, I'm gonna have to book time off work. I'm gonna have to, there's family responsibilities. It's getting the time out there, and then obviously I'm gonna have to do this. And he said that's when the real consumption started of content. He said he watched every podcast, he read every article, so that obsession began at that stage for him.
And I guess he had to ramp up his training as well then.
Yeah, and we'll go on to that, because like many people, he didn't have a perfect run into that. And you can postpone. So if you get an entry and you get injured or can't do it, you can postpone until the following year your entry for the draw. So you're not guaranteed your place, but you don't lose your tickets. I think that's a really good thing they've brought in to ensure that people that aren't going to do it pass it back to the organizer to make sure that someone can get that place. But we'll come on to that in a little while. And there's some really good stories, actually. There was a guy that you spoke to last year, wasn't there, that had actually got on a plane.
Well, that's it. I think people who don't get in the lottery, there's a waiting list of 250 people or something. A few people.
I think it's 80 people.
It's 80 people in the lottery, so you might have a chance of. There's quite a few people drop out as injuries come.
I actually think that if you get on that list, then you at least the top 80% have got a very good chance of getting it because of the average dropouts.
Okay, so there was this guy called Russell Gardner. I think he's from Eastbourne, South Coast, UK, England, and apparently sort of a few days before the race, he kind of gets a message from the organisers saying, listen, you're kind of next on the list. If you want to take a risk and book a flight from the UK to the US to get out to California, you're probably going to be on the start list. So Russell had a decision to make. He decided to go for it, booked a flight, took the risk. By the time he lands in California, I'm not sure which airport, he had an email waiting saying, welcome, you're in. Yeah. So this guy's gone, oh my goodness, he's hardly prepped.
A couple of days before the race, probably.
Within the race. So I think Russell was probably seen as someone who was quite obsessed about getting in.
Yeah, and I noticed from our notes, he finishes in golden hour. Is that right?
Yeah, I think he finished in golden hour.
Wow, that's mental.
Yeah, so it just showed, you know, sort of you've got to be persistent, I think, with the lottery and with getting your tickets.
What a journey.
Wow, I mean, his story is phenomenal. And it's quite extreme at the end of that lottery sort of waiting list situation. I mean, it's quite a complex sort of system, isn't it? I think because there's some sponsor places, and I think, as we said earlier, each aid station captain is allowed to select someone to go in. So there's those 369 places soon get eaten up by a few others. So there's 40 or 50 elite runners across males and females that get in through golden tickets off return. The top 10 finishers, male and female, get to return. So that takes up 20 slots. etc. So there's the amount of people that actually win the lottery is way below 369.
Yeah. So did you say it was about 250 that actually get a place?
I think so. Yeah. Through the lottery. Yeah.
It's really hard to get in.
Yeah, really difficult to get in. So you've got to jump at that chance.
Yeah, and literally years of planning.
How would you go about planning it?
Well, this is something, as you know, that I've been looking into. On the back of us starting this, it just inspired me to think all of a sudden I want to do that. And, you know, I've never done, the longest race I've done is 60k.
Yeah.
Never really wanted to do it 100k or above. It's just not really floating my boat for whatever reason. I've given it a lot of thought, but
the research on this project's got you obsessed.
Yeah, also, you know, I have thought about, you know, the iconic races, you know, Hard Rock, Western States, even UTMB.
Yeah, I remember I volunteered at a race in southern Arizona on the similar course to Hard Rock, and it was a 100-mile race. It was called the Double Dirty 30. It was back in 2017 when I was traveling around the US a bit. Hard Rock, you know, I was like thinking, oh my God, if I wanted to get into this race or be capable of doing it, it would take me 5 years of learning mountain craft to prepare. So even that transition from you running OCC or 60k this year to running 100 miles, such a transition physically and mentally and doing all that different stuff.
I did start looking at it, and it's quite complicated, I would say, or it felt complicated. But actually, it's probably reasonably simple. You've got a list of qualifying races. You have to complete one of those races before, I think this year, November the 5th or 8th, something like that, to allow you to then go into the following year's entry. The difficult part of that is, for me, I've got OCC at the end of August. So you're looking at this in May. You're injured. So you know you really can't do anything before OCC because your preparation is about getting ready for that race. Then you've got a very short window from the end of August to November. So, you know, how do you squeeze in a race of that magnitude when you've never done that distance after doing a 60-mile race like OCC? So you're thinking, right, late October, but then the opportunity with the number of races and where they are at that period is very difficult. So the reality for me this year is that it's very unlikely I'm going to be able to find a race that's not sold out that's going to fit my calendar, which means I'll miss getting onto that kind of entry process, if you like, for this year.
So realistically, we're now recording this in June 2026.
Yeah.
What year do you think you could realistically be on that start line, presuming you got your ticket drawn?
I think a realistic look about when you would get there would be 5 years. You know, you could well get in 2 or 3, but it just, from some of the content we've consumed recently and the Western States podcast and things like that, it just sounds like that pool of people trying to enter has been getting larger. I think you might have mentioned it was a 10,000 people in this year's ballot.
It's a ballpark figure, yeah.
You know, as a percentage chance, you're down to 2.5%. Now, obviously, as the years go on, your number of tickets increase, so your chances increase. And
the reason I'm asking you is because I need to prep to be a pacer or a crew and get myself prepared for when you're doing it. So we've got 5 years.
Well, you could get that takes us quite nicely onto the next section, Scott. Why don't you just get a golden ticket?
Well, yeah, I have thought about it, and I think there's only a few people in the 50s that actually get in through golden ticket. Ludo, Jeff Browning is the one on the American side who seems to be forever on that start line and pushing under 20 hours consistently. But so the golden ticket system, what is a golden ticket, I guess, is the question. Western States organisation have teamed up with various races around the world. Some of them are UTMB races, to have these golden ticket races where there are actually 6 races around the world. The first one, as we mentioned earlier, is CCC. That's the end of August. And then I think the last one is probably Canyons, which I think is about April. So from August to April, you've got a chance of qualifying. So in 3 of the races, there are the top 3 get in, male and female, and which is CCC, Black Canyon, and Canyons Endurance Run. And then in the other 3 races, the top 2 get in. So, and if the person decides they don't want to take that ticket, they hand it down to the person who became 3rd or 4th. So it trickles down to the person below them, and they get the chance to do it as well. So some people famously turn it down because they're not ready, or they've got another ambition for that year. So that's limited to sort of 15 runners, 15 tickets, male and female, every year. So that's 30 people, 30 elite people get in who are usually at the top of their game when they get that golden ticket in the 6 months before the race.
It's these races quite exciting. So I mean, it must be quite. Just read the races out. You've got CCC,
which is part of UTMB week at the end of August. Black Canyon 100k race. CCC is also 100k, and Canyons Endurance Run, which I think is 100k. So there's 3 100k races. Javelina 100, which is also a 100k race, and Tarawera 100k race, which is in New Zealand. I've run that race, and that's a great race with great aid stations. And then Chianti Ultra Trail, which is 100k race in Italy.
But they've got some good aid stations.
Great aid stations. I think it runs through wine fields and wine regions as well. So there's some great destination races to kind of go if you think you're good enough to try and get one of those golden tickets.
Gives those races a little bit of excitement, some more meaning, and just adds to the hype and the obsession. And it's a high-level competition approach to it, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the professionalisation of the sport is something that's going on, and these elites, not necessarily all the elites are professional, but like you say, the global hype around the race is growing. The global hype on the rise of the ultra runner is growing. So whether it's in Asia Pacific, or whether it's across Europe, or whether it's in even Latin America, the number of races, UTMB has 90 races across the world now. So this thing is exploding, and people want part of it, and they want to get to the big race. So the demand is there for getting into the lottery, and the demand is also there to win the golden ticket races. So the quality is, people are pushing in these races, and they're pushing each other to get faster, and people are breaking these records in these races because they're desperate to get the golden ticket.
There's certainly 2 races in there. There's the mass participation race and the 30 hours, but it really creates a truly elite field for the Western States race itself.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when you see the gap now, also sort of how fast the gender gap is decreasing. You see how fast the women are running now under 20 hours and getting. I think last year in the top 30 there was about 12 women in the top 30 overall in Western States. So they're all under 20 hours or something. So it's the women's races. Everyone's pushing each other faster and faster, and this is a runnable course for the elites. They can run massive sections of this. It's not supremely mountainous like some of the alpine races or hard rock, but there's a lot of fast runnable sections. So that's why you can get down. The fast guys are getting down to 14, 15 hours. So phenomenal. So once you get in, it's obviously going to be tough. But what actually makes it so hard?
I think to answer that question, we'll maybe talk about Dave, and hope you don't mind, Dave, and about his DNF in the race.
I didn't know he DNF'd.
He did, yeah.
Tell me about that.
Well, this is a guy that's got a 500 Legend Slate trophy. So that's you get one of those for doing 5 Lakeland 100s finishes. And he's done lots of other 100 miles and things like that. So he's a very experienced ultra runner. Yeah, he's had many, many years building up to this race. I think it's fair to raise the point that he had quite a bad run into the race. So I think from April he had an injury, and then he recovered from that and then got an Achilles problem. So he did consider not actually going. But that aside, there's a lot going on in this race.
Yeah.
You know, there's from the immediate climb. So he sent me a Strava file, and the heat on these on the app, you can see from early in the morning was in the 30s throughout. The course terrain is very difficult. That no doubt puts a lot of pressure on you. You're gonna start trying to go quicker. You're trying to drive out of the hills. You know, there's the time on feet, sleep deprivation. Things are different as well. At the aid station, if you're European, the food that you're getting is very different. You know, pickle juice and things like that. It's the unknown that's making it difficult.
I guess in an ideal world, you'd arrive a month before, but that's not everyone's situation, is it? Or very few people's situation. But did Dave sort of see this race against the course or against the clock, or a bit of both? What was his main? I'm stressed with time, but so was he more racing the clock than the course then?
I think that it definitely became that. He felt a lot of pressure on him to get to the next aid station. He said when they were at one of the other English guys came through and came over into him and said, we're really behind time here, we really need to push on. He said at that point I hadn't kind of realised, so it just put a lot of mental pressure on me to push on. He knew when he was coming into that. Chris had a video of him walking in, and he said it's quite hard for him to see that, and he was feeling very down at that point. He'd staggered a couple of times, and he knew he wasn't going to be able to carry on. It was very difficult going into the canyons. You're coming out of Devil's Thumb. It's very steep terrain. Your quads are bashed from the downhills. Entering the canyons can be difficult as well, because so it's like that feeling when you're coming off a plane and you get a rush of heat hitting you, and you just get waves of that as you're going down. So there's a lot going on. I asked him about was there any other thoughts of like snakes and cougars and things like that? And he said, sometimes you're running along and you'll just hear something scuttle in the grass near you, and you're becoming very paranoid of what's around you.
Yeah, we'll touch on that later, for sure. So where did he DNF?
So he got to Michigan Bluff,
right.
But I think he'd known 3 or 4 hours before that it wasn't going to be his day for a 100-miler. He'd taken a few staggers, he'd fallen over, and he was just getting very tired, and that was a very difficult experience, no doubt. And I think we're talking to him about him reflecting on that as well. You often think back to a race, don't you, about how you could have done better, how things could have been different. But he said there was a realization when he reflected that even in walking back to the car, he was really struggling, had to stop a couple of times. So it wasn't a mental thing, it was a physical thing that stopped him that day.
Was that dehydration or a mix of food, dehydration, etc.? So
I think
just not getting enough down in?
I think fatigue probably caught with him in the end. The preparation wasn't what he was hoping for, and it's not a race you can go in for unprepared.
I received an email today from one of the nutrition companies, and it was basically how travel can ruin your performance, and he was talking about a combination of jet lag, disrupted sleep, and unfamiliar foods, and all that travel stress. And it seems like that kind of probably caught up with him, which is one of the risks that you face if you're going to take this on in some years' time.
And I think it's not failure; it's a reality of the situation, isn't it? And years of dreaming to get to this point, and that's where that obsession comes back. Because the other feeling that I had was going to the airport when they were leaving, seeing other people in there with their buckles, people walking around in sliders, and straight from that point onwards, there was never a doubt in his mind that he wanted to go back and finish the job.
So has he done another entry race?
He absolutely has, and he's back on the horse trying to get in.
I'm definitely on Team Dave now.
Absolutely.
For sure. Right. I mean, another story that stands out for me from last year as well was Rini Sugianto, who's Indonesian and became the first Indonesian female finisher of the race. And fortunately for Rini, she's based over that way in California, so she'd had time to acclimatise. But Rini also came home in golden hour after an almighty struggle, but a bigger team around her than Dave. She runs in the local community, etc., and was probably used to the food and probably wasn't sleep deprived or whatever it was that led to Dave's sort of unfortunate demise on that day. But I think one thing that's sort of compelling about Rini's story, she represents this global sort of reach of the race now, that she wasn't always living in California. I think she was living in New Zealand, and she back and forth between Indonesia and New Zealand, Jakarta and Auckland or Wellington, and was still captured by this ultra running theme, and then eventually got an opportunity to move out to California and jumped into this race when she got an opportunity. And for me, for somewhere that's so far off, to be brought into this obsession is fascinating. And it was great to sort of chat with Rinny after the race last year and get a couple of articles in the Indonesian newspapers with her and get to see that sort of the Indonesian ultra running scene to be ecstatic and sort of hyped by Rinny's success. So
yeah, was it a big story?
Yeah, we got into a couple of national newspapers with that story, and it's interesting now to see Indonesians coming off to Europe for other races, and probably trying to get into Western states as well, just like we are from the UK.
Okay, so the environment we've touched on, but you've got the canyons, the river crossings, and the wildlife. So why do these environments and conditions make it so difficult?
Well, if you're coming from, say, the UK or somewhere outside of the US and outside of this wilderness mountainous areas, then you're faced with something, not just the different combination of underfoot conditions. We talked about the snow going up the escarpment at the start and then down into more gravelly roads and then into the canyons, and then you've got some sandy areas, and then you cross over Lucky Chucky with a life vest on in a dinghy, and you are then sort of going up more uphills and downhills with various different terrains. So the terrain is extremely different all the way through the race. That's for sure. And then you've got sort of the flora and fauna. And before we get onto the wildlife, sort of one thing that I've picked up that interests me is not just a highly diverse, biodiverse mountain range, which contains a lot of California's wild species, but you've also got these, besides the giant sycamore trees, which must be amazing to see, and the alpine meadows and the ponderosa pine trees, you've also got Pacific poison oak, which I never heard of until I started researching this a little bit more, but it gives you a massive skin irritation. And in some of the research I did, some runners avoid this area because the reaction to that skin irritation is so bad. So can you imagine, like, not just that, but nettles as well. There's like nettles out there. So for anyone who's thinking, you're going to transition from road running into wilderness mountain running, and you're going to take on something like Western States wilderness area, you've got poison oak, you've got nettles, you've got various different terrain, and you've also then got the fauna, so the wildlife. And I think if you're looking at what we've got out there in those areas, it ranges from the American black bear, and then you've got sort of bighorn sheep, mountain lions, grey wolf, bobcats. I mean, it's sounding something like a Marvel film at the moment. There's even Wolverines out there. So the only instance I could find of someone being killed by a black bear was on a BBC website report from 2024. So there is instance of black bears killing someone, and I think that was the first ever report. But interestingly, in last year's race, Fee Pascal, who's top end British elite runner, she finished in the top 10, and Fee's sister Beth Pascal won the race in the past. So Fee's a British hope of maybe one day winning the race. And this story was relayed to me by an Irish runner who's called Ricky Wynn, and Ricky was running close to Fee, I think a bit behind her. He kind of turned a corner and he saw this bear charging towards Fee Pascal, this black bear. They're not massive, but they're big enough to scare you, sort of fear. And he said, Fee stood her ground and faced this bear off. And eventually the bear disappeared, and Ricky was kind of a bit behind, a bit helpless, but he was like, oh my God, she just stuck there so brave. So add on to the travel, add on the rough terrain and the bad night's sleep or poor preparation for injuries, you've also got this flora and fauna, this wildlife, which you're not going to get running through the streets of London or doing a 5K on the track.
I think during the night as well, that would really become, you're on your own, hallucinating a little bit, you're tired.
And I think when you run during the night, your hearing improves. So you're not seeing what you see, but you hear everything, more. So I think you mentioned it earlier where Dave was running through and he could hear rattlesnakes, the snakes out there as well. I didn't mention the snakes. So I think the environment is a massive challenge, especially if you're coming from overseas and you're not used to that sort of environment.
I think the feeling of remoteness, and if you need to get out of the race, there's no easy extraction. You have to get to one of these aid stations, and it's long drives, poor communication options. So you've got that weighing down on your thoughts when you are going through rough patches.
Especially if you're going into hallucinations, you're going into 24 hours. And when you say, if you've been running 24 hours and you think, right, I've got 5-6 hours to go, I can make under 30, but you've also been up for a good 30 hours. You probably woke up 3 or 4 hours before the race to get there at 5 o'clock. You might have only had 4 hours sleep, the night before, because you were up at 3 o'clock, and you might have. So all those things add into this sleep deprivation, which is.
Yeah, and what you've just said, there's no way I'm lying down on the side of that trail for a kit.
Trail naps are the way to go, So do you take a bear spray with you, do you put that into your pack as well? Which is common kit that people carry when they're going running out in those areas on a training route.
Just to take Fee Pascal with me, I think.
Well, we'll be keeping an eye on Fee, and hopefully there'll be some camera action on her and getting the pictures of the bears and her taming the bear again this year. So why does all this still matter? In this day and age, why does Western States, why is it such an obsession? Why does it still matter?
Yeah, I think it's the history is one. You've got Gordy, you've got the Tevis Cup, you've got the Golden Hour, the buckles, the traditions, the trail itself. There's just so much going on and so much to think about, and so many tales to tell.
And combine that with the standard it sets. I think all this history's morphed into this community thing that's produced a standard for the trail running world to follow. Whether it's about how you organise an aid station or how you organise the organising committee itself, but also how you actually get volunteers to do trail work before the race. It's become a blueprint. Can you throw out a comparison to UTMB as a race, maybe?
I think it's so similar in so many ways, but so different. UTMB is a commercial organisation on such a vast scale. It has to grow to make profit, to survive. That changes the shape and the feel of it.
It's not to belittle the French scene, but the community feel in France and the way that trail running has developed in France is a little bit more commercial. But when you look at the community aspect, this combination of history and setting a standard, and the community sort of involvement and sense of belonging, that no matter if you're going to the race as a participant or whether you're going as a family member or, as we've said, as a crew member, you want to be part of that story. You want to be part of that 24 hours or 30 hours.
It feels like it's a force for good for people.
Yeah.
It feels like good things come out of it for people in their lives. Around that community. And around that sense of being and be part of something, and the amazing achievements it'll bring to someone's life.
And I think people have committed to that race for so many years, whether as a volunteer or as a runner or both, and they keep coming back to be part of that feeling and that sense of belonging. I mean, on top of that as well, it's morphed also into probably one of the most competitive and genuine elite races, for both men and women. How does it manage to get all those things in one place? So some races are just great on community, but it's not all that competitive at the front end. But this also has one of the most competitive fields year on year.
It attracts the greatest athletes in the world still.
Yeah.
And as such, it matters.
And it's genuine for me as well, because there's no prize money, and how does the organisation manage to make ends meet? And it does. And there's no prize money. Yes, it's $500 roughly to get in, but if you finish, you will get a buckle, which is worth way more than $500. So the way that they balance the books, but gives everybody something, and the elites are running this not for prize money. Obviously, they get something if they win or do well in that field. They get quite a bit of attention and money from their sponsors and bonuses, etc. But still, it's such a genuine elite race.
And the sponsors obviously see it as very important.
Yeah.
Hulk are a huge supporter of the race.
Yeah.
And as such. I guess that's how a lot of these things are funded.
Yeah. And I think back in the 80s, even Levi's sponsored it. So things have changed, but I think they've just got that balance right between community and commercialisation, and it works. It sits well with a lot of people.
And then there's the stories.
Yeah, the people, the untold stories that we've covered a few of today.
Yeah, the people like Chris and Dave, his amazing challenge and adventure.
Then the likes like Brian Morrison and Fee Pascal and a bear, like those are fascinating sort of part of that amazing Western States canon of history.
Russell's journey on the plane, getting off the plane and finding out about his ticket as he lands.
Yeah, I mean, everyone has a story. I don't think Russell's story will ever be repeated again, to be honest, but you never know, do you?
And maybe that's why people keep coming back.
I mean, you need to give your heads up when you're going.
Yeah. So I think the history draws you in, the community keeps you there, the competition gives it meaning, the stories gives the intrigue.
And it's a perfect combination. I think very rarely you get all these combined together. It's the perfect storm for a perfect race.
50 years after Gordy first set off on his solo run, people are still adding their own chapters to this story.
The only thing left to say is I'll see you in States.
I'll see you there.
Untold Trails. Stories from the trails. Past, present, and what comes next.